Nathaniel Thornhill stood at the tall windows of his study, watching the
We
long
must go
gravel
now.
drive that curved
Yes,
through the
I am ready.
manicured grounds of
Take my
Thornhill
hand.
Estate
I will wait for
like
you.
a question mark waiting to be answered. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Newport lawns, turning the perfectly trimmed hedges into dark sentinels, guarding secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The marriage contract lay on his desk behind him, signed, sealed, irrevocable, binding him to a woman he had never met, whose face he could not picture, whose voice he had never heard. Miss Rosalind Fairchild of the declining Fairchild Railroad fortune, 23 years old, educated at Vassar, fluent in French and Italian, played the pianoforte, in plain, unremarkable, grateful for the opportunity to marry above her station. Those were his mother's exact words, repeated in 3 separate letters over the past month. A suitable girl, Nathaniel, plain but pleasant. She understands this is a practical arrangement. She won't expect romance or grand gestures. She'll be grateful for security, and you'll have a wife to satisfy society's expectations. It's perfect. Perfect. Nathaniel had prepared himself for many unpleasant realities about this arrangement. Awkward silences over breakfast, a lifetime of polite indifference, separate bedrooms and separate lives under the same roof. He had convinced himself it was acceptable. Millions of marriages functioned on far less. He would build his railroad empire, and she would manage his household, and they would coexist in the civilized manner expected of people of their class. What he had not prepared for, what he could not have prepared for, was the possibility that his mother had lied. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. Nathaniel's hand tightened on the windowsill, his knuckles going white against the dark wood. This was it. The carriage that would deliver his future. His carefully constructed world of emotional distance and rational planning was about to meet reality. He told himself not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment, and disappointment led to the kind of pain he had sworn never to feel again after Emily Carlisle had chosen his wealthier cousin 5 years ago. This was business. This was duty. This was... The carriage door opened. A gloved hand emerged, first delicate fingers accepting the footman's assistance, then the hem of a traveling dress in deep sapphire blue, the fabric catching the afternoon light like water. And then she stepped down onto the gravel drive, and Nathaniel Thornhill forgot how to breathe. She was not plain. She was not unremarkable. She was absolutely, devastatingly, impossibly beautiful. Dark hair the color of midnight swept back from a face that belonged in a Renaissance painting. High cheekbones, a straight nose, lips that curved in a way that suggested intelligence and humor in equal measure. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart, sapphire blue, like her dress, sharp and observant, taking in every detail of the estate, with the kind of focused attention that spoke of a mind constantly working, constantly analyzing. This woman was no grateful recipient of his charity. This woman looked like she could have had any man in New York. Nathaniel's hand slipped. The crystal tumbler of whiskey he'd been holding shattered against the hardwood floor. He barely noticed. Good God, he whispered to the empty room. What has Mother done? 20 minutes later, Nathaniel stood in the grand entrance hall, surrounded by the assembled household staff, trying to look like a man who had not just spent the last 15 minutes staring at his reflection in the mirror and wondering if his cravat was tied properly. He was 32 years old. He controlled a railroad empire that stretched from Boston to Chicago. He had negotiated contracts with senators and generals. He had survived the brutal competition of the Gilded Age and emerged wealthier and more powerful than men twice his age. And he was terrified of meeting his own fiancée. The massive oak doors swung open. Theodore, his butler, stood with the kind of dignified bearing that made lesser men feel like schoolboys caught stealing apples. Miss Rosalind Fairchild, Theodore announced. She stepped into the entrance hall, and the world contracted to just the two of them. Up close, she was even more striking. Her traveling dress was elegant, but showed signs of the long journey from New York, a fine layer of road dust on the hem, a small wrinkle near the collar that suggested she had been reading or writing during the trip, rather than sitting perfectly still, like a porcelain doll. But it was the way she moved that captivated him. Grace without affectation. Confidence without arrogance. She walked like a woman who knew her own worth and didn't need anyone else to validate it. Their eyes met across the polished marble floor. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or the acknowledgement of a truth neither of them had expected. This was not going to be the marriage either of them had been promised. "Mr. Thornhill," she said, her voice like music, warm and clear. She offered a curtsy that was graceful without being subservient. "I believe you were expecting me." Expecting her. What a magnificently inadequate phrase for the earthquake currently reshaping his understanding of reality. "Miss Fairchild." He crossed the distance between them, acutely aware of every eye in the room watching this first meeting. "Welcome to Thornhill Estate. I hope your journey was comfortable. As comfortable as 8 hours in a railway car can be." A hint of humor touched her lips. "Though I must say your company's passenger carriages are considerably more luxurious than most. The seats actually have cushions." He found himself smiling despite his confusion. "I insist on quality in all aspects of my business." "I can see that." Her gaze swept the entrance hall. The vaulted ceiling, the crystal chandelier imported from Paris, the marble staircase that curved upward like a frozen waterfall. But she wasn't looking at it with the wide-eyed wonder his mother had predicted. She was evaluating it, cataloging it, understanding the wealth it represented and what that wealth meant in the brutal hierarchy of Gilded Age America. This was not a woman grateful for security. This was a woman who understood power. "Theodore will show you to your rooms," Nathaniel said, maintaining the formal distance expected of them, despite every instinct screaming at him to ask her who she really was and why his mother had lied. "I thought you might wish to rest and refresh yourself before dinner." "That would be most welcome." She paused and something flickered in those sapphire eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the same confusion he felt. "Mr. Thornhill, I wonder if we might speak privately before dinner. There are matters we should discuss." "Of course. Shall we say 6 o'clock in the library?" "Perfect." She followed Theodore up the grand staircase and Nathaniel watched every step until she disappeared from view. Then he turned and walked directly to his study, closed the door, pulled out the locked drawer where he kept his mother's correspondence, and began to read every letter she had sent about Rosalind Fairchild with new and suspicious eyes. The library at Thornhill Estate was Nathaniel's favorite room in the house. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls filled with volumes on everything from railroad engineering to ancient philosophy. A massive stone fireplace dominated the 4th wall, and through the tall windows the Atlantic Ocean stretched to the horizon like hammered silver. He was standing at those windows when she arrived, watching the sun paint the waves in shades of amber and gold. "Mr. Thornhill," he turned. She had changed from her traveling dress into an evening gown of pale green silk that somehow made her eyes even more luminous. Her dark hair was arranged in an elegant style that framed her face perfectly. She was, if possible, even more beautiful than before, and she looked terrified. The realization struck him like a physical blow. This stunning, intelligent, composed woman was afraid. Of him, of this marriage, of something else entirely. "Please," he said gently, gesturing to the chairs arranged before the fireplace. "Sit down, Miss Fairchild, and please call me Nathaniel. I think we're past the point of excessive formality." A flicker of relief crossed her face. She settled into one of the chairs with that same unconscious grace he'd noticed before. He took the chair across from her, studying her face in the firelight. "You wanted to speak with me?" "Yes." She folded her hands in her lap, perfectly composed except for the white knuckles that betrayed her tension. "I find myself in a somewhat awkward position, Mr. Thorne, Nathaniel. I'm not entirely certain how to begin." "The beginning is usually a good place." That earned him a small smile. "The beginning. Very well." She took a breath. "What exactly did your mother tell you about me? Direct. No dancing around the subject. He liked that." "She told me you were the daughter of Jonathan Fairchild, whose railroad construction business has fallen on difficult times due to a series of unfortunate circumstances. She told me you were educated but plain, unremarkable, that you had failed to secure a husband during several seasons in New York society, and that you would be grateful for the security this marriage would provide." Each word felt like a stone dropping into still water, and he watched the ripples of emotion cross her face. Hurt, anger, and beneath it all a kind of grim confirmation. "I see," she said quietly. "And what do you see instead, Nathaniel?" He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked at her directly. "I see a woman of obvious refinement and education. I see someone who could grace any ballroom in New York and command the attention of every man present. I see someone who is beautiful, accomplished, and far too intelligent to need an arranged marriage for security. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she didn't look away. And yet here I am. Yes, here you are. He paused. What did your mother tell you about me? Ah, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. She told me you were a confirmed bachelor who had no interest in romantic love, that you wanted a wife who would be invisible in society, who wouldn't draw attention or cause gossip, that you specifically requested someone plain and unremarkable who wouldn't complicate your life. She told me to expect polite indifference at best and that I should be grateful for even that much. Nathaniel felt anger building in his chest, not at her, but at the women who had manipulated them both into this situation. I made no such requests. I never asked for someone plain or invisible. I simply told my mother I needed to marry to satisfy society's expectations, and she took it upon herself to arrange this match. And my mother took it upon herself to misrepresent both of us. Rosalind's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. The question is why, Mom? I think, Nathaniel said slowly, that our mothers have been playing matchmaker with rather more creativity than honesty. But to what end? Why lie to both of us so extensively? He rose from his chair and moved to the window, needing distance to think clearly. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. Perhaps they thought if we knew the truth about each other, we would refuse the match. Or perhaps they had other reasons we don't yet understand. What do we do now? Her voice was quiet, vulnerable in a way that made something in his chest tighten. He turned back to face her. We start over, he said firmly. Forget everything we were told about each other and about this arrangement. Tell me about yourself. The real you, not the version our mothers created. She looked surprised, then cautiously hopeful. You truly want to know? I truly want to know. For a long moment, she just looked at him, weighing something in her mind. Then she stood and crossed to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines with obvious familiarity. I'm 23 years old, she began. I graduated from Vassar 2 years ago with honors in literature and mathematics. I speak French and Italian fluently, and I've been teaching myself German. I play the pianoforte and the harp. I've read every book in my father's library twice over, most of them 3 times. I enjoy writing, dancing, and intellectual conversation that doesn't involve gossip or fashion. She pulled out a volume, Plato's Republic, and held it up. I have very strong opinions about politics and social reform that most people find quite shocking in a woman. I believe women should have the right to own property after marriage. I believe the current labor laws are unconscionable and need complete reform. I believe education should be available to all children regardless of their birth or circumstances. She replaced the book and turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw defiance and dignity in equal measure. I had 3 full seasons in New York, and I received 7 marriage proposals. I refused all of them because the men who proposed wanted me for my appearance or my family's connections to the railroad industry, not for who I actually am. I chose to remain unmarried rather than accept a proposal from someone who saw me as a beautiful ornament rather than a partner. Nathaniel felt something shift in his chest, a realignment of everything he thought he knew about marriage and women and possibility. Those men, he said quietly, were fools. She smiled, really smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Your turn, she said. Tell me about the real Nathaniel Thornhill. He moved to stand beside her at the bookshelf, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair. I'm 32 years old. I inherited Thornhill Railway when my father died 8 years ago, and I've spent every day since then building it into one of the most successful railroad companies in America. I have offices in New York, Boston, Chicago, and San Francisco. Last year alone, we laid 2,000 miles of new track. He pulled out a different book, Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, and showed it to her. I believe in capitalism, but I also believe in responsibility. I pay my workers better than any other railroad company. I've established schools in 5 of our major railway towns, so workers' children can get an education. I've implemented safety regulations that cost me thousands of dollars, but have saved hundreds of lives. He replaced the book and met her eyes. I've never been married because I've never met a woman who wanted to know the real me instead of just the fortune I represent. I've attended more society balls than I can count, and I've danced with countless beautiful women who looked at me and saw only dollar signs and social status. I want a partnership, not a transaction. I want someone who will challenge me, debate with me, build something meaningful with me. And that, Rosalind said softly, is exactly what I want too. They stood there in the fading light, two people who had been lied to and manipulated into this moment, and found themselves unexpectedly grateful for the deception that had brought them together. Nathaniel, she said, and hearing his name on her lips felt intimate in a way he hadn't expected. What if our mothers knew exactly what they were doing? What if they lied because they knew we would never have agreed to meet if we knew the truth about each other? What do you mean? You're wealthy, powerful, and accomplished. If you knew I was beautiful and educated, you might have thought I was another fortune hunter. And if I knew you were looking for an intellectual equal instead of a convenient wife, I might have been too proud to accept what looked like charity to my struggling family. He considered this, turning it over in his mind like a chess problem. So they lied to remove our defenses, to get us past our prejudices and fears. Perhaps, she moved closer to the window, her reflection ghostly in the darkening glass. Or perhaps there's another reason entirely. Perhaps there's something we don't yet know. Your mother is expected to arrive tomorrow, Nathaniel said. We'll have our answers then. Tomorrow. She turned back to him, and in the twilight her face was half shadow, half light. And what do we do until then? He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, stopping just close enough that he could see the faint scatter of freckles across her nose, could count the different shades of blue in her eyes. We get to know each other, he said, the real versions of ourselves without the muss and pretense. We see if this arrangement our mothers forced upon us might actually become something worth choosing. And if it doesn't, then we'll deal with that honestly too. She studied his face for a long moment, and he felt the weight of her evaluation. This was a woman who had refused 7 marriage proposals. This was a woman who knew her own mind and wasn't afraid to act on it. All right, she said finally. Honesty, no more pretense. But Nathaniel, there's something you should know. What? I'm terrified. The admission hung between them raw and vulnerable. Of me, he asked gently. Of this, of marriage, of losing myself in someone else's expectations. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very young and very alone. My mother has been pressuring me for 2 years to accept a proposal, any proposal. She said I was being too picky, too proud, that I would end up alone and penniless. When she arranged this marriage, I felt like I was giving up, surrendering, admitting that I was wrong to want more. Nathaniel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warm evening. You weren't wrong, he said firmly. You were brave. You held out for what you wanted instead of accepting less. That's not surrender, that's strength. But I still agreed to this arranged marriage. Because sometimes the brave thing is to take a risk on something new, to see possibility instead of just compromise. She looked down at their joined hands, and he felt the moment shift, becoming something fragile and precious. What if we fail? She whispered. What if we don't? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge and a promise. Then she smiled, small and tentative but real, and squeezed his hand. I think, she said, that I would like very much to find out. They talked until well past midnight. Sitting in the library with a fire crackling in the hearth and the stars wheeling overhead, they dismantled the walls of formality and pretense that society had built around them and found the people underneath. He told her about growing up as the only son of demanding parents, the pressure to be perfect, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted things from him but never truly saw him. She told him about her childhood in the shadow of her father's declining fortune, watching her mother grow more desperate with each passing year, feeling like a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. They discovered they had both lost siblings, his younger sister to scarlet fever when he was 12, her older brother to a railway accident 3 years ago. They found they shared a love of architecture and a fascination with the emerging technologies that were reshaping America. They argued companionably about tariff policy and women's suffrage, and he was delighted to discover she could hold her own in a debate about economic theory. At some point, Theodore appeared with a quiet cough to ask if they would like refreshments. At some other point, the moon rose and painted the ocean in silver light. Neither of them noticed the passage of time. It was only when Rosalind stifled a yawn behind her hand that Nathaniel realized how late it had gotten. I'm keeping you up, he said apologetically. I'm keeping myself up. She smiled. I haven't had a conversation like this in... I'm not sure I've ever had a conversation like this. Neither have I. They stood and he walked her to the library door. In the hallway beyond, gaslights cast pools of golden illumination. Thank you, she said, for tonight, for listening, for being nothing like I expected. Thank you for the same. They stood there in the doorway, neither quite willing to end the evening. The air between them felt charged with possibility, with all the things left unsaid. Nathaniel knew he should bid her good night and let her go. They were still practically strangers, still bound by propriety and expectation. But standing there in the half-light with this remarkable woman who had somehow become the most interesting person he'd ever met, propriety felt like a cage he wanted to escape. Rosalind, he said quietly. Yes. Tomorrow morning, would you walk with me in the gardens? There's something I'd like to show you. I'd like that very much. 9 o'clock. Perfect. She turned to go, then paused and looked back over her shoulder. Nathaniel, I'm glad our mothers lied to us. He smiled. So am I. He watched her walk down the corridor until she disappeared around a corner, then stood alone in the library doorway for several more minutes trying to understand what had just happened to his carefully ordered life. Somewhere in the space of a few hours, his arranged marriage to a stranger had transformed into something else entirely. Something that felt dangerous and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. He was falling for his own fiancée, and he had no idea if she felt the same way. Morning broke clear and bright over Thornhill Estate, the Atlantic wind carrying the scent of salt and possibilities. Nathaniel was awake before dawn, unable to sleep, pacing his room like a caged animal. He changed his outfit 3 times before settling on something between formal and casual, cursing himself for caring so much about his appearance. He was a grown man, a captain of industry, and he was acting like a schoolboy preparing for his first dance. At 8:45, he gave up on patience and went down to the gardens to wait. At 8:53, she appeared. She wore a walking dress of deep burgundy that brought out the rose tones in her complexion, and her dark hair was arranged in a style that was elegant without being overly formal. She looked like she had slept as poorly as he had, but somehow that made her more beautiful, more real, more human, more possible. Good morning, she said, and her smile was shy, almost tentative. The confident woman from last night had given way to someone younger and more vulnerable, and Nathaniel found himself wanting to protect that vulnerability, even as he admired her for showing it. Good morning. He offered his arm and she took it, her hand light on his sleeve. How did you sleep? Terribly. You? Same. They walked in companionable silence through the formal gardens, past roses that were just beginning to bloom and hedges trimmed into geometric perfection. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and green, and somewhere in the distance, birds were singing their morning songs. You said you wanted to show me something, Rosalind said after a while. Yes. He led her down a winding path toward the back of the property where the formal gardens gave way to something more wild and natural. When my sister died, I was 12 years old. My parents dealt with their grief by becoming more rigid, more focused on propriety and expectation. I dealt with mine differently. They emerged from the manicured paths into a clearing surrounded by old oak trees. In the center stood a small structure, part gazebo, part observatory with a copper dome that had turned green with age. I built this, Nathaniel said. Or rather, I helped our groundskeeper build it. I needed a place to escape to somewhere I could just be myself without expectations or judgment. I spent hours here reading, thinking, watching the stars. He opened the door and led her inside. The interior was simple, a round room with windows on all sides, a few comfortable chairs, and in the center, an old telescope pointed at the sky. It's beautiful, Rosalind breathed, turning slowly to take it all in. No one else knows about this place except Theodore. Not even my mother. He paused, suddenly feeling vulnerable. I wanted you to see it. I wanted you to know that I understand what it's like to need a space that's just yours. She looked at him with something in her eyes that made his breath catch. Thank you for sharing this with me. They sat in the chairs by the window looking out at the wild garden and the ocean beyond, and the silence between them was comfortable, companionable, shot through with an intimacy that felt both new and somehow ancient. Nathaniel, Rosalind said after a while, her voice serious, can I ask you something? Anything. If our mothers lied about us to each other, what else might they have lied about? What if the reasons for this marriage aren't what they told us? It was the question that had been nagging at the back of his mind since last night. I've been thinking the same thing, he admitted. Your family's financial troubles are real, but they're not insurmountable. My mother has been pushing me to marry for years, but there was never this kind of urgency before. Something doesn't add up. And my mother has been desperate for me to accept a proposal, but she specifically pushed for this one. She said it was perfect, that you were perfect, but she lied about everything else. Why? Before Nathaniel could answer, the sound of carriage wheels on gravel drifted through the open windows. They both turned toward the sound tension, suddenly crackling in the air. That's her, Rosalind said, her voice tight. My mother. She's early. Nathaniel stood and offered his hand. Then let's go get our answers. She took his hand and rose, and for a moment they stood very close together, close enough that he could see the silver flecks in her blue eyes, could feel the warmth of her breath. Nathaniel, she said quietly, whatever we learn, whatever the reason they brought us together, I want you to know that I'm glad they did. So am I. They walked back toward the house, hand in hand, neither quite ready to let go, both aware that whatever truth awaited them would change everything. Mrs. Margaret Fairchild was waiting in the drawing room when they arrived, and the moment Nathaniel saw her face, he knew something was very wrong. She was a handsome woman in her late 40s, dressed in expensive but slightly outdated clothing that spoke of faded wealth trying to maintain appearances. But it was her expression that caught his attention, a mixture of anxiety and relief and something that looked almost like fear. Rosalind, darling, she said, rising to embrace her daughter. You look well. Mother, Rosalind's voice was cool, controlled. You're early. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. I know, I'm sorry, but there are matters that couldn't wait. Mrs. Fairchild's eyes flicked to Nathaniel, then away. Matters I should have discussed with both of you before the wedding. What kind of matters? Nathaniel asked, his instincts, honed by years of business negotiations, telling him to be very careful. Mrs. Fairchild sank back into her chair, and suddenly she looked much older, worn down by some weight she'd been carrying. I need to tell you the truth, she said quietly, about why I arranged this marriage, about why I lied to both of you. Rosalind sat down slowly, her face pale. Nathaniel remained standing, every muscle in his body tense. Then tell us, he said. Mrs. Fairchild took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice trembled. The financial difficulties I described to Mrs. Thornhill were real, but they weren't the primary reason for this marriage. The truth is, she looked at her daughter with eyes full of pain and love. Rosalind, you're in danger. You have been for over a year. And this marriage was the only way I could think of to protect you. The room seemed to contract, the air growing thick and heavy. What kind of danger? Rosalind's voice was steady, but Nathaniel could see her hands gripping the arms of her chair, knuckles white. Do you remember Cornelius Blackwell? Rosalind's face went chalk white. Of course I remember him. He proposed to me 18 months ago. I refused. He wasn't a good man. He's worse than you know, darling. Mrs. Fairchild's voice broke. After you refused him, he became obsessed. He started following you everywhere, the theater, the park, social gatherings. He would watch you from across rooms, send flowers with disturbing notes. I increased our household security. I made sure you were never alone, but it kept escalating. Nathaniel felt ice spreading through his veins. What kind of notes? Mrs. Fairchild pulled a bundle of letters from her bag with shaking hands. These. I've been saving them. Nathaniel took them, and Rosalind moved to stand beside him as he opened the first one. The handwriting was elegant, educated, but the words made his blood run cold. My dearest Rosalind, you looked exquisite at the Van Cortlandt ball last night. Blue becomes you, though I prefer you in white, like a bride. You will be mine, darling. It's only a matter of time. You can fight it, but we both know how this ends. We both know you belong to me. Forever yours, Cornelius. Nathaniel opened another. Rosalind, I saw you with that banker's son yesterday. Did you let him touch your hand? Did you smile at him the way you smile at me in my dreams? Don't make me jealous, darling. You won't like me when I'm jealous. Remember what happened to Emily Hartwick when she tried to marry someone else? Forever yours, Cornelius. Rosalind made a small sound of distress. Nathaniel's hand tightened on the letters so hard the paper crumpled. Who is Emily Hartwick? He asked, though he already feared the answer. A woman Blackwell courted 2 years ago, Mrs. Fairchild said quietly. She refused his proposal and became engaged to another man. A week before her wedding, she disappeared. They found her body 3 months later in the woods outside the city. The official verdict was accident, but She couldn't finish. Dear God, Rosalind whispered. Nathaniel forced himself to keep reading. The letters got progressively worse, more possessive, more threatening, more explicit about what Blackwell would do to anyone who came between him and Rosalind. The final letter was dated 3 weeks ago. Rosalind, I hear you're to be married to the railroad magnate Thornhill. Do you think his money will protect you? Do you think his name will keep you safe? I could kill him in his sleep and make you watch. I could make it last for hours. I could make you beg me to let him die. But I won't. Not yet. Because I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything you thought would save you. I want you to understand that there is no escape from me. There is only submission or death. Choose wisely, my love. Forever yours, Cornelius Nathaniel's vision went red around the edges. He had to consciously force himself to breathe, to think, to not immediately call for his carriage so he could drive to New York and beat Cornelius Blackwell to death with his bare hands. How long has this been going on? His voice came out perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, and somehow that made it more frightening. 18 months of letters, 2 months of following her. 3 weeks ago, he approached Mr. Fairchild with an offer to buy our railroad contracts at far below their value. When my husband refused, Blackwell made it clear he had other ways of getting what he wanted. Mrs. Fairchild's voice shook. He said accidents happen to young ladies who ride alone. He said it would be a shame if something happened to Rosalind before she learned to appreciate his devotion. Rosalind had gone very still beside him, her face carved from marble. So you arranged this marriage, she said, her voice eerily calm, to get me away from him, to put me under Nathaniel's protection. I'm sorry I lied to you both, Mrs. Fairchild said, tears streaming down her face now. But I was terrified. Blackwell has connections, senators, judges, police commissioners. He's untouchable through normal channels. But as the wife of Nathaniel Thornhill, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in America, you would be beyond his reach. He wouldn't dare move against you. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Rosalind turned to Nathaniel, and in her eyes he saw fury and fear and determination all warring for dominance. I understand if you want to end the engagement, she said, and her voice only trembled slightly. This isn't what you signed up for. This isn't a business arrangement anymore. It's dangerous. You could be hurt. You could be killed. I won't ask you to take that risk for a woman you barely know. Nathaniel looked at her, this brilliant, beautiful woman who had somehow become the most important person in his world in the space of less than 24 hours. This woman who was facing a monster and still standing straight, still offering him an escape, still thinking of his safety over her own. He set the letters down carefully on the table and took both her hands in his. Rosalind Fairchild, he said clearly, I would marry you if you came with a dozen dangerous enemies. I would marry you if it meant taking on every corrupt politician and criminal in New York. I would marry you if Cornelius Blackwell was standing at the altar with a gun. Her eyes widened. This changes nothing except my understanding of what this marriage means, he continued. I thought I was agreeing to a convenient arrangement. Instead, I'm getting the privilege of protecting the most remarkable woman I've ever met from a man who richly deserves everything I'm going to do to him. Nathaniel, let me finish. He squeezed her hands gently. I've spent 2 years building a railroad empire. I've crushed competitors who thought they could intimidate me. I've negotiated with senators and outlasted men who tried to destroy me. I'm very, very good at protecting what's mine. And as of our wedding day, you will be mine, not in the way Blackwell thinks of ownership, but in the way partners protect each other, in the way I would protect anyone I care about. You care about me, she whispered. I'm falling in love with you, Rosalind. After one night of conversation and one morning in my secret place, I'm already halfway there. So yes, I care about you. And no, I'm not ending this engagement. I'm going to marry you, and then I'm going to make sure Cornelius Blackwell regrets the day he ever heard your name. She stared at him, and slowly, impossibly, a smile began to spread across her face. You're insane, she said. Probably. He's dangerous. He's killed before. So have I. At her shocked expression, he clarified, in business, I've destroyed men's entire fortunes when they cross me. I've never killed anyone, but I've made plenty of powerful men wish they'd never been born. This is different. This is physical danger, not just financial. Then I'll hire security, the best guards money can buy, We'll take precautions. We'll be smart about this. He pulled her closer. But I won't abandon you, Rosalind. Not now, not ever. Why? The question was barely a breath. Because in less than a day, you've shown me what I've been missing my entire life. Because you're brilliant and brave and real. Because I looked into your eyes last night and saw someone I could build a life with, someone I could grow old with, someone worth fighting for. And because if I let fear make this decision, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling. I'm falling for you too, she admitted. It's crazy and fast and terrifying, but it's true. Last night in the library, this morning in your secret place, I kept thinking this is what I've been waiting for. This connection, this understanding, this feeling of being truly seen by another person. He pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, tucking her face against his shoulder. Over her head, he met Mrs. Fairchild's eyes. I'll protect her, he said quietly. With my fortune, my name, and my life if necessary. But in return, I need you to tell me everything you know about Cornelius Blackwell. Every detail, every connection, every weakness. Because I'm not just going to protect Rosalind, I'm going to destroy him. Mrs. Fairchild nodded, relief and gratitude warring on her face. Rosalind pulled back just enough to look up at him. Thank you, she said. For what? For loving me, for protecting me, for standing with me through all of this. She cupped his face in her hands. For being exactly the partner I needed. Thank you for choosing me, for trusting me, for being brave enough to fight back. They kissed, then soft and sweet and full of promise. Not the passionate kiss of newfound lovers, but something deeper. A covenant, a commitment, a vow that went beyond the words they would speak in front of witnesses. I want to make love to my future husband, Rosalind said when they broke apart, then blushed furiously. I didn't mean... He laughed, the tension of the moment breaking. I know what you meant. And when you're ready, when this is all over and you feel safe, I'll be honored to be your husband in every sense. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks, he confirmed. And then you'll be Mrs. Nathaniel Thornhill, and Cornelius Blackwell will learn what it means to threaten my family. Our family, she corrected softly. Our family, he agreed. And as they stood there in the golden morning light, hands clasped and futures intertwined, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the trees beyond the garden. A figure with cold eyes and colder intentions. A figure who had just made a very dangerous decision. Cornelius Blackwell smiled in the shadows and turned away. The game he thought was about to get much more interesting. The next morning, Nathaniel sat in his study with 5 leather-bound folders spread across his desk, like cards in a very dangerous game. Each folder represented a different avenue of attack against Cornelius Blackwell. Each one had been prepared overnight by men who understood that when Nathaniel Thornhill asked for information, he expected results. Theodore entered with coffee and the morning newspapers, his expression carefully neutral. The gentleman from the Pinkerton agency has arrived, sir, and Mrs. Thornhill has sent word that she'll be arriving on the afternoon train. Nathaniel looked up from the folder detailing Blackwell's business holdings. My mother is coming early. It appears Mrs. Fairchild sent her a telegram last night regarding the situation. Of course she had. His mother would want to be here, would want to manage this crisis the way she managed everything else, with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. Show the Pinkerton man in. And Theodore? Yes, sir. How is Miss Fairchild this morning? The butler's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Whitmore reports that she slept poorly but is in good spirits. She's currently in the music room. Nathaniel could hear it now if he listened, the faint sound of piano music drifting through the house. Something classical and complicated, played with the kind of precision that required both skill and concentration. She was processing her fear through music, finding control in something she could master. He understood that completely. Send in the detective, he said. James Murphy was not what Nathaniel had expected. The Pinkerton agent was in his early 50s, with iron gray hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent doing difficult work in difficult places. He wore a plain suit that had seen better days, and his hands were scarred and calloused. This was not a man who worked behind a desk. Mr. Thornhill, Murphy's handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and assessing. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please sit. Murphy settled into the chair across from the desk and pulled out a notebook that was as battered as his suit. I've been investigating Cornelius Blackwell for the past 6 months. he said without preamble. Ever since Sarah Morrison's body was found, her family hired us when the police ruled it an accident. And what did you find? That Blackwell is very good at covering his tracks. Murphy flipped through his notebook. Sarah Morrison wasn't his first victim. There was a woman in Boston 3 years ago, Margaret Wells. She refused his marriage proposal and married someone else. 6 months later, she fell down the stairs in her own home and broke her neck. Her husband was out of town on business. Blackwell had an alibi. He was at a dinner party with 20 witnesses. But you don't believe it was an accident. The stairs in the Wells home were in perfect condition. Margaret was young, healthy, sure-footed. And the night before she died, a neighbor saw a man matching Blackwell's description watching the house from across the street. Murphy's voice was flat, emotionless, but Nathaniel could hear the anger underneath. The Boston police accepted his alibi and closed the case. Nathaniel felt something cold and hard settling in his chest. What about Emily Hartwick? Found dead in the woods 3 months after she disappeared. Official cause of death exposure. Unofficial truth, she'd been held somewhere first. The medical examiner found evidence of prolonged captivity, rope burns on her wrists and ankles, signs of starvation and dehydration. Murphy met his eyes. She didn't just die, Mr. Thornhill. She was tortured. The piano music from the music room continued, beautiful and oblivious. Tell me about his connections, Nathaniel said quietly. Murphy pulled out another notebook. Blackwell's father was Senator Thomas Blackwell, deceased 5 years ago. But before he died, he made sure his son had relationships with every major political figure in New York. Cornelius currently has 3 senators, 2 congressmen, 4 judges, and half the New York Police Department in his pocket. He pays them well and they look the other way. No one is untouchable. No, sir, but Blackwell comes damn close. Murphy leaned forward. Here's what I know for certain. He's obsessed with Miss Fairchild. He believes she belongs to him, and he's not going to stop just because she's married to someone else. Of anything that will make him more dangerous. What would you recommend? Honestly, cancel the wedding. Get Miss Fairchild out of New York. Send her to Europe, California, anywhere Blackwell can't easily follow. Keep her hidden until we can build a case strong enough to put him away permanently. Nathaniel shook his head. That's not an option. Mr. Thornhill, we're getting married in 2 weeks as planned, but we're going to do it intelligently. He pulled out one of his own folders. I need you to hire the best security team you can find. Former military men, people who know how to handle themselves in a fight. I want them vetted thoroughly. Anyone with connections to Blackwell gets eliminated immediately. Murphy was already taking notes. How many men? As many as it takes. Money is not a concern. And for the wedding itself, I want every guest screened. I want guards at every entrance. I want men posted on the grounds in the house everywhere. Nathaniel's voice was calm, methodical. And I want you personally to investigate Blackwell's movements for the next 2 weeks. Where he goes, who he talks to, what he's planning. I want to know before he makes a move. That's a lot of surveillance. I'm paying you enough that it shouldn't be a problem. Murphy smiled grimly. No, sir, it won't be a problem. He paused. Can I ask you something, Mr. Thornhill? Go ahead. Why not just have Blackwell killed? You have the money. You could hire men who would make it look like an accident. Given what he's done, no one could blame you. The question hung in the air between them. Because that would make me like him, Nathaniel said quietly. And because Miss Fairchild deserves to see justice done properly publicly, so she knows she's truly safe. Killing Blackwell in the dark might solve the immediate problem, but it wouldn't give her peace. Murphy studied him for a long moment, then nodded with what looked like respect. You're a good man, Mr. Thornhill. Miss Fairchild is lucky. I'm the lucky one, Mr. Murphy. Now tell me, how do we destroy this man legally? They spent the next 2 hours going through every aspect of Blackwell's life, looking for vulnerabilities, building a strategy. And with every page turned, every fact documented, Nathaniel felt his resolve hardening into something unbreakable. Cornelius Blackwell had made the mistake of threatening the woman Nathaniel loved. That mistake would cost him everything. Rosalind found him in the study 3 hours later, surrounded by folders and notes, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. You missed lunch, she said from the doorway. He looked up and the sight of her alive, safe reel made something in his chest unclench. I wasn't hungry. Liar. She crossed to the desk, moving with that unconscious grace that made him catch his breath every time. Theodore says you've been in here since 7 this morning with nothing but coffee. I've been working. I can see that. She glanced at the folders, and he saw her face tighten as she recognized Blackwell's name on several of them. Learning about my monster. He's not your monster anymore. He's mine. She smiled at that, small and sad. Nathaniel, you can't take this all on yourself. I'm not some helpless damsel who needs rescuing. I know that, but you also don't have to face this alone anymore. He stood and came around the desk, taking her hands. They were warm in his steady despite everything. Let me help carry this weight. That's not how partnership works. We carry it together. All right, then tell me, what do you know about Blackwell that might help us? She was quiet for a moment, and he could see her organizing her thoughts the way he'd watched her organize her arguments the night before last. This was a woman who thought before she spoke, who chose her words carefully. He's brilliant, she said finally. That's what makes him so dangerous. Most people see the charm, the wealth, the social connections. They don't see what's underneath. But I saw it. What did you see? A man who believes the world owes him whatever he wants. A man who's never been told no and doesn't understand the word. When I refused his proposal, it wasn't rejection to him, it was a challenge, a puzzle to be solved. Her hands tightened on his. He told me once that I would come to understand we were destined to be together, that resistance was futile. He said it like he was explaining mathematics to a child. Nathaniel felt rage building again, hot and sharp. Did he ever threaten you directly? Not at first. At first, it was flowers and poems and declarations of love. But when I made it clear I wasn't interested, things changed. She pulled away and moved to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. He started appearing places I would be. The theater, the park, even outside our home. Always watching, always smiling. Like he knew something I didn't. And your parents. My mother was frightened. My father was furious but helpless. Blackwell's connections made it impossible to get a restraining order or any legal protection. The police said they couldn't arrest a man for being in public places or sending flowers. Her voice was bitter. So we tried to manage it ourselves, more guards, different routes, staying home more, but it felt like being in prison. Nathaniel crossed to stand behind her, close but not touching, letting her decide if she wanted the contact. You're not in prison anymore, he said quietly, and you never will be again. She turned and there were tears in her eyes, but also something fiercer. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that whatever we do, whatever happens, we do it together. I need to be part of this, Nathaniel. I need to face him, to show him he doesn't have power over me anymore. I can't just hide behind your name and your money. I need to stand up. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. I promise, we're partners in this. Equals. You don't hide, and I don't do this alone. She kissed him then, fierce and quick and full of determination, and he tasted salt and courage on her lips. Now, Blackwell, she said when they broke apart, show me what you've learned and let's make a plan together. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, building a strategy that used both his resources and her knowledge. Rosalind had insights into Blackwell's personality that proved invaluable. She knew how he thought, how he would react, what would push him to act rashly. He's arrogant, she explained, pointing to one of Murphy's reports about Blackwell's business dealings. He believes he's untouchable because he's always been untouchable. That's his weakness. If we can get him to do something public, something undeniable, his connections won't be able to save him. So we bait him. We bait him. She smiled, and it was sharp as a knife. The wedding is perfect. It's public, it's high society, and it's the one thing he absolutely cannot allow to happen. He'll have to make a move. That's what I'm afraid of. Don't be, we'll be ready. Nathaniel studied her face, the determination, the intelligence, the absolute refusal to be a victim, and felt himself falling deeper in love with every passing moment. You're extraordinary, he said. She laughed. I'm terrified and furious in equal measure. You can be both. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Murphy's men arrived, 12 of them, all former military, all vetted personally. They set up a security perimeter around the estate that would have impressed a general. Nathaniel watched them work and felt marginally better about the whole situation. His mother arrived on the afternoon train full of apologies and barely concealed terror for what she'd inadvertently caused. She and Miss Fairchild spent hours closeted together, and when they emerged, both looked like they'd been through a war. I had no idea, his mother said to him privately. Margaret told me Rosalind's was plain and unremarkable because she was afraid if I knew the truth, I'd think she was angling for money. And I told Margaret you wanted someone invisible because I was afraid if she knew you were looking for an intellectual equal, she'd think you were too particular. We were both trying to make the match happen by removing obstacles. We never dreamed. I know, Mother, it's all right. It's not all right. I put that girl in danger. You also brought us together, and now we're going to end this threat permanently. She looked at him with something like awe. You love her? Yes. After 3 days. After 3 hours, if I'm honest. His mother smiled through her tears. Your father would have liked her. I know. On the 4th day, Blackwell made his first move. Rosalind had insisted on going into Newport to pick up her wedding dress from the seamstress, despite Nathaniel's objections. She'd taken 2 guards with her and promised to be back before dark. She was gone for 3 hours. When she didn't return on schedule, Nathaniel felt panic claw at his throat. He was preparing to ride into town himself when the carriage finally came racing up the drive, moving faster than was safe on the gravel road. He was out the door before it stopped, and his heart didn't start beating again until he saw her step down pale but unharmed. What happened? Blackwell's men tried to take me. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as he helped her from the carriage. 3 of them outside the dress shop. They had a carriage waiting. Nathaniel felt ice in his veins. Where are your guards? Here, sir. The 2 men climbed down, looking worse for wear. One had a split lip and the other a black eye forming. We fought them off. The Newport police arrived before they could get her into their carriage. You're hurt, Nathaniel said, taking Rosalind's arm and seeing the torn sleeve of her dress, the bruise forming on her wrist. One of them grabbed me. Your guard Thomas broke his arm getting me free. She looked at the 2 men with obvious respect. They saved my life. Nathaniel turned to the guards. You'll both receive a bonus, a substantial one, and my eternal gratitude. Just doing our job, sir. Did the police arrest Blackwell's men? They did, Rosalind said, but they'll be out by morning. Blackwell's lawyers are probably already at the station. Nathaniel helped her into the house, his mind racing. This was escalation. This was Blackwell showing he was willing to act, willing to take risks. This was also opportunity. We need to talk to Murphy, he said. They gathered in the study, Nathaniel, Rosalind, Murphy, and the 2 guards who'd fought off the attackers. Nathaniel poured whiskey for everyone and listened as Thomas described what had happened. They were waiting outside the seamstress shop, professional organized. 2 blocked the street, 1 tried to grab Miss Fairchild. They were trying to get her into the carriage fast before anyone could react. But you did react, Murphy said. Yes, sir. Training kicked in. I hit the one grabbing her, broke his arm at the elbow. Patrick took down one of the blockers. The 3rd one ran when he heard police whistles. Did any of them say anything? Thomas hesitated. The one I broke said Miss Fairchild was making a mistake, that Mr. Blackwell's wanted to talk to her, that she'd understand if she'd just listen. Rosalind made a disgusted sound. Talk, as if kidnapping me off the street is a conversation. This is good, Murphy said unexpectedly. Everyone turned to look at him. How is attempted kidnapping good? Nathaniel asked. Because he's getting desperate, making mistakes. This was sloppy, too public, too many witnesses. The old Blackwell would never have tried something this risky in broad daylight in the middle of town. Murphy smiled grimly. He's losing control. And when men like him lose control, they expose themselves. So what do? We let him keep escalating, but we're ready for it. We tighten security, we document everything, we build a case so overwhelming that even his political connections can't save him. Rosalind leaned forward. And then we destroy him publicly, at your wedding, in front of everyone who matters. The plan was forming, dangerous and delicate as spun glass. Nathaniel could see it taking shape in Murphy's eyes and Rosalind's determined expression. He'll come to the wedding, she said softly. He won't be able to help himself. The thought of me marrying someone else, it will drive him mad. Then we'll be ready, Nathaniel said. Every guard on high alert, police on standby, witnesses everywhere. He looked at Murphy. Can you coordinate with the local authorities? Already done. Chief Morrison owes me a favor. He'll have men positioned around the property in civilian clothes. The moment Blackwell makes a move, we take him down. What if he doesn't make a move? Rosalind asked. What if he just watches? Then we've still won, Nathaniel said. You marry me, you're legally under my protection, and Blackwell loses his leverage. She smiled. Either way, I become your wife. Either way. The next week passed in tense preparation. The wedding was planned down to the smallest detail. Not just the flowers and music and guest list, but also the security protocols, the escape routes, the contingency plans for every possible scenario. Rosalind threw herself into it with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. She wasn't hiding from the threat. She was facing it head-on, using her own wedding as a battlefield. Nathaniel had never loved her more. They stole moments alone when they could, morning walks in the garden before the rest of the house woke, late-night conversations in the library after everyone else had gone to bed. They talked about everything and nothing, dreams and fears, memories and hopes. They were building something real in the shadow of danger, and somehow that made it more precious. 3 days before the wedding, they sat together on the bench in his secret observatory, watching the stars wheel overhead. Are you afraid? She asked quietly. Terrified. Me too. He pulled her closer and she tucked herself against his side like she belonged there. Like she'd always belonged there. Baimon, Rosalind, and if anything happens, don't. She put her fingers over his lips. Don't say goodbye. Don't plan for the worst. We're going to win this. We're going to get married and we're going to be happy. And Cornelius Blackwell is going to rot in a prison cell for the rest of his miserable life. How can you be so certain? Because the alternative is unacceptable. She tilted her face up to look at him, and in the starlight, her eyes were luminous. I've spent 18 months being afraid. I'm done with fear. Now I'm just angry, and I'm going to use that anger to make sure he never hurts anyone again. He kissed her, then slow and deep, tasting her courage and her determination and the promise of all their tomorrows. I love you, he said when they finally broke apart. I love you too. Even though this whole thing is completely insane, especially because it's completely insane. They sat together until the stars began to fade, holding each other in the darkness, storing up strength for the battle to come. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect June day that belonged in paintings and love poems. Nathaniel stood in his room being dressed by Theodore, trying not to think about all the things that could go wrong. The formal wedding attire felt like armor black, morning coat, white vest, perfectly tied cravat. He looked like a man preparing for the most important day of his life, which he supposed he was. The guests are beginning to arrive, sir, Theodore said, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced precision. Murphy reports no sign of Blackwell yet. He'll come. I know, sir. Nathaniel turned to face his butler, the man who'd been with the family for 30 years, who'd taught him to tie his first cravat, who'd stood by him through his father's death and his own rise to power. Thank you, Theodore, for everything. The butler's expression softened. It's been my privilege, sir. And might I say Miss Fairchild is a remarkable young woman. Your father would have approved. I hope so. I know so. Rosalind stood in her room surrounded by women, her mother, Nathaniel's mother, Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper, and the seamstress who'd created her gown. The dress was unlike anything she'd ever imagined. Layers of cream silk flowed like water, with delicate embroidery of climbing roses worked in silver thread across the bodice and train. The design was modern, yet timeless, fitted at the waist before cascading into a skirt that moved like liquid moonlight. Her dark hair was woven with tiny white blossoms, and a veil of French lace so fine it looked like morning mist crowned her head. She looked like a queen preparing for coronation. She felt like a soldier preparing for war. You're beautiful, darling, her mother said, tears streaming down her face. I'm terrified. You can be both, Mrs. Thornhill said gently, and Rosalind smiled at the echo of Nathaniel's words. It's time, Mrs. Thornhill added softly. Rosalind took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared to walk into her future. The chapel at Thornhill Estate was small, but exquisite, built by Nathaniel's grandfather 50 years ago. White roses and ivory ribbons decorated every surface. 200 guests filled the pews. New York society at its finest, come to witness the marriage of one of America's wealthiest men. They were also witnesses to whatever Cornelius Blackwell was planning. Nathaniel stood at the altar, Murphy at his side, dressed as a groomsman, but really there as security. Around the chapel, disguised among the guests and staff, were 20 armed men ready to act at a moment's notice. The music began, the guests rose, and Rosalind appeared at the end of the aisle on her father's arm. Nathaniel forgot how to breathe. She was luminous, ethereal, moving toward him with that same grace that had captivated him from the moment she stepped out of her carriage. But there was something else now, strength, determination, the absolute refusal to be a victim. She was choosing this, choosing him, choosing to face her fear in front of everyone who mattered. She reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in Nathaniel's. Their eyes met, and in that look was everything: love, fear, courage, promise. The minister began to speak. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Nathaniel heard the words, but didn't process them. He was too focused on Rosalind, on the way her hand trembled slightly in his, on the pulse beating rapidly at her throat. "If anyone has cause why these two should not be joined in matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace." Silence. And then the chapel doors didn't slam open. There was no dramatic entrance. Instead, a figure in clerical robes stepped forward from the back pew where he'd been sitting unnoticed among the guests. The black cassock and white collar had hidden him perfectly, just another clergy member among the wedding party. But when he pulled back his hood, Cornelius Blackwell's wild eyes gleamed with triumph. "I object," his voice echoed through the chapel. "She belongs to me," and he gasped from the congregation. Murphy's hand moved toward his weapon. The disguised guards tensed. But Blackwell was already moving his hand, emerging from beneath the cassock with a revolver. "Clever," Murphy muttered. "Disguised as clergy. We check guests, not officiants." Nathaniel stepped forward, placing himself between Blackwell and Rosalind. "This is a private ceremony, Blackwell. Leave now or I'll have you removed." "You can't have her." Blackwell's hands shook as he raised the gun. "She's mine." Women screamed. Men dove for cover. But Nathaniel didn't move. He stood perfectly still, shielding Rosalind, with his body staring down the barrel of Blackwell's revolver with absolute calm. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Shoot me. Do it in front of 200 witnesses, including 3 judges and the governor of Rhode Island. See how far your connections get you then." Blackwell's hands shook. "You don't understand. She loves me. She's just confused. If you just let me explain." "I've never loved you." Rosalind's voice rang out clear and strong. She stepped around Nathaniel, facing Blackwell directly. "I told you no 18 months ago. I've told you no in every way possible. And I'm telling you no now in front of everyone. I don't love you. I love my husband." "We're not married yet," Blackwell said desperately. "Then let's fix that." Rosalind turned to the minister. "Continue the ceremony." The minister looked terrified. With a gun." "He won't shoot." Rosalind's voice was absolute certainty. "He's a coward who hides behind his father's connections and his family's money. He threatens women because he knows he can't face men as equals. He's pathetic." Blackwell's face went purple with rage. "You, Careful." Nathaniel's voice was deadly quiet. "That's my wife you're talking about." "She's not your wife." "Not yet, but in about 5 minutes she will be. And then you'll have nothing. No leverage, no claim, no fantasy to cling to. She'll be mine legally, and you'll be arrested for threatening murder in front of 200 witnesses." Blackwell looked around wildly. Every eye in the chapel was on him. Every guest was a witness to his breakdown. And in the doorway behind him, police officers were quietly moving into position. His hand lowered. The gun wavered. "You've ruined everything," he whispered. "No," Rosalind said. "You ruined everything yourself the moment you refused to accept my answer. You could have moved on. You could have found someone who actually wanted you, but you couldn't let go, and now you're going to lose everything." Murphy moved, then fast and professional. He had Blackwell's gun hand twisted up behind his back before the man could react. The revolver clattered to the floor. Police officers swarmed in. Blackwell was hauled to his feet, handcuffed, read his rights. "Rosalind," he screamed as they dragged him away. "This isn't over. I'll never let you go." "It's over," she said quietly, "and you already have." The chapel doors closed behind Blackwell and the police. Silence fell thick and heavy. Then someone started clapping. The governor of Rhode Island rose from his pew, applauding. Others joined him. Within seconds, the entire congregation was on their feet, applauding, not just for the drama they'd witnessed, but for the courage they'd seen. Rosalind turned to Nathaniel, and there were tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Shall we get married now?" she asked. "I thought you'd never ask." The minister recovered from his shock, cleared his throat, and returned to his place. "Where were we? Ah, yes. If anyone has cause, well, we've covered that. Let's skip ahead. Nathaniel Thornhill, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And Rosalind Fairchild, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Rhode Island, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Nathaniel pulled Rosalind into his arms and kissed her like he'd wanted to from the moment he first saw her, deep and passionate and full of promise. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands in his hair, her body pressed against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and glowing, the chapel erupted in applause again. They turned to face their guests as husband and wife, and Nathaniel felt something settle in his chest. Peace, security, the absolute certainty that everything was going to be all right. They walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, out into the brilliant June sunshine, into their future. Behind them, the guests filed out, already turning the morning's events into the story that would dominate New York society for months to come. And in a police carriage already halfway to the Newport jail, Cornelius Blackwell sat in handcuffs and realized he'd lost everything. The reception at Thornhill Estate was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it felt like the aftermath of a battle. Guests milled about in clusters, their voices hushed and excited, rehashing every moment of Blackwell's dramatic arrest. The story was already being embellished. In some versions, he'd fired the gun, in others, he'd threatened to burn down the chapel. By tomorrow morning, half of New York would believe he'd brought an army. Nathaniel didn't care about any of it. He stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens, watching Rosalind through the French doors. She was inside, surrounded by well-wishers, accepting congratulations with that same gracious smile she'd worn all afternoon. But he could see the strain around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. She'd been magnificent, brave beyond measure. She'd faced down a madman with a gun and never flinched. But bravery always had a cost. "She's holding up well," Murphy said, appearing at his elbow with 2 glasses of whiskey. "Most people would have collapsed by now." Nathaniel accepted the glass but didn't drink. "She's stronger than most people." "That she is." Murphy took a long sip. "The police chief wanted me to tell you they're charging Blackwell with attempted murder, unlawful possession of a firearm, and terroristic threats. Between the witnesses here and the attempted kidnapping earlier this week, they're confident about a conviction." "Good. There's more." Murphy's voice dropped lower. "I've been digging into his finances like you asked. Found some interesting things. Blackwell Steel Company is leveraged to the hilt. He's been borrowing heavily to maintain his lifestyle and political connections. If the right pressure was applied—" "Apply it." Murphy smiled grimly. "Already started. By Monday morning, 3 of his largest creditors will be calling their loans. All of them companies you either own or have influence over. He won't be able to cover them. And his political friends won't help him when the money runs out. Politicians are loyal to power and cash, not friendship." Murphy finished his whiskey. "You're going to destroy him financially before he ever sees the inside of a courtroom." "I'm going to destroy him in every way that matters," Nathaniel said quietly. "Money, reputation, freedom. By the time this is over, Cornelius Blackwell will have nothing left but the memory of what he lost." "That's cold, Mr. Thornhill." "That's justice." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the party continue inside. "Your wife is looking for you," Murphy said eventually. "I'd say your honeymoon awaits, but I suspect you both need rest more than romance tonight." Nathaniel turned to look through the glass again. Rosalind had extracted herself from the crowd and was scanning the room, clearly searching for him. When their eyes met across the distance, her entire face changed. The social mask dropped away, and he saw the exhaustion and relief underneath. He set down his untouched whiskey and went to her. They said their goodbyes to the remaining guests as quickly as politeness allowed, then escaped to the private wing of the house. The moment they were alone in the corridor, Rosalind's composure cracked. She didn't cry. She just stopped moving, stopped smiling, stopped being the brave bride everyone expected her to be. She stood in the middle of the hallway in her beautiful wedding dress and shook. Nathaniel gathered her into his arms without a word. She buried her shake against his chest and held on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to water. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe, I've got you." They stood there for a long time, her trembling, gradually subsiding, his arms a fortress around her. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were dry but haunted. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should be stronger than this. You were strong all day. You're allowed to fall apart now. I ruined our wedding." "You saved our wedding." He cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "Rosalind, you faced down a man with a gun. You testified against him in front of 200 witnesses. You refused to be his victim even when he was holding your life in his hands. You didn't ruin anything, you won. Then why do I feel like this? Because you're human. Because fear doesn't just disappear once the danger is over. It has to work its way out." He kissed her forehead gently. "Let it out. Shake. Cry if you need to. I'm not going anywhere." She nodded against his chest, then pulled back with obvious effort. "Help me out of this dress," she said. "I can't breathe in it anymore." An hour later, they sat together in Nathaniel's private sitting room, changed into comfortable clothes, the wedding finery abandoned in heaps on the floor. Rosalind wore one of his shirts over her chemise. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves around her shoulders. She looked young and vulnerable and infinitely precious. They hadn't spoken much. She'd curled up on the sofa with her head in his lap, and he'd stroked her hair while she stared into the fire, processing everything that had happened. "Tell me about the trial," she said eventually. "What happens now?" "Blackwell will be arraigned tomorrow. Given the severity of the charges and the number of witnesses they'll deny bail, he'll sit in jail until the trial." "How long?" "Murphy estimates 6 weeks. The prosecution will want to move fast while the events are fresh in everyone's mind, but these things take time. Discovery, jury selection, preparation." "And you think they'll convict him?" "Rosalind, 200 people watched him pull a gun on us in a church. 3 of them were judges. The governor himself was there. There's no amount of political connection that can overcome that kind of evidence." She was quiet for a moment. "What about the other women, Sarah Morrison and Emily Hartwick?" "Murphy is building those cases too. He's found evidence, witnesses who saw Blackwell with Emily before she disappeared, financial records that place him near where Sarah's body was found. It's circumstantial, but combined with everything else, he'll hang." The words were flat, emotionless. Nathaniel's hands stilled in her hair. "Yes," he said quietly. "He'll hang." "Good." She sat up and turned to face him. "I know I'm supposed to feel conflicted about that. I know gentle ladies aren't supposed to want men dead. But I can't pretend to feel something I don't. He killed those women. He would have killed me. He deserves to die." "I agree. Do you think that makes us bad people?" Nathaniel considered the question carefully. "I think it makes us honest people who understand that some actions have permanent consequences. Blackwell chose his path. He chose obsession over sanity, violence over acceptance, murder over moving on. We didn't make him a monster. We're just refusing to pretend he isn't one." She leaned against him and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I'm glad I married you," she said softly, "even though our wedding turned into a circus. Especially because of that. You didn't flinch when he pulled that gun. You just stepped in front of me like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was the most natural thing in the world. You're my wife. Protecting you is what I do. Our marriage is 3 hours old, and you've already taken a bullet from me. Metaphorically speaking. I'd take a real one if I had to." She tilted her head up to look at him. "I know you would. That's what terrifies me." He kissed her, then soft and slow and full of promise. Not the passionate kiss of the ceremony, but something deeper. A covenant, a commitment, a vow that went beyond the words they'd spoken in front of witnesses. When they broke apart, she smiled small and real and just for him. "Take me to bed," she said. I'm not ready for that yet, but I don't want to be alone tonight. You never have to be alone again." They spent their wedding night curled together in his bed, fully clothed, talking in whispers, until exhaustion finally claimed them both. Nathaniel held her through nightmares she couldn't quite remember upon waking, and she held him through the lingering adrenaline that made sleep difficult. It wasn't the wedding night either of them had imagined. It was better, because it was real and honest and exactly what they both needed. The trial began 6 weeks later. The courthouse in Newport was packed beyond capacity, with hundreds of people standing in the street hoping to catch a glimpse of the proceedings. The newspapers had turned it into the story of the decade, the obsessed heir who'd terrorized innocent women, finally brought to justice by the courage of one bride who refused to be silenced. Rosalind hated every second of the attention, but she endured it with the same grace she brought to everything else. Nathaniel sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery every day, a silent pillar of support. He watched his wife take the stand on the trial's third day and tell her story to a rapt audience. She was magnificent. The prosecutor led her through the timeline carefully: Blackwell's initial proposal, her refusal, the escalating harassment that followed. She read excerpts from his letters, her voice steady even when the words made several women in the gallery gasp in horror. "And on your wedding day, ma'am," the prosecutor asked, "what did Mr. Blackwell do?" "He disguised himself as a member of the clergy and entered the chapel undetected. During the ceremony, he revealed himself and said I belonged to him. Then he pulled out a gun and pointed it at myself and my husband. Were you afraid, terrified? But you confronted him anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Rosalind had looked directly at Blackwell for the first time since taking the stand. He sat at the defense table looking nothing like the polished aristocrat he'd been. 6 weeks in jail had hollowed him out. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild and unfocused. He'd stopped bathing, stopped shaving. The veneer of civilization had cracked completely. "Because I was tired of being afraid," Rosalind said clearly. "Because he'd taken 18 months of my life and I wanted them back. Because I knew that if I didn't stand up to him, then in front of all those witnesses, he would never stop. So I stood up." "Thank you, Mrs. Thornhill. No further questions." The defense attorney, a man clearly uncomfortable with his client, approached for cross-examination. "Mrs. Thornhill, isn't it true that you and Mr. Blackwell had a romantic relationship prior to your marriage?" "No, we did not." "But he courted you, sent you gifts, wrote you letters." "He harassed me. There's a difference." "Did you ever encourage his attentions?" "Never. Not even once, not a smile, a kind word, anything that might have given him hope." Rosalind's eyes flashed. "Mr. Blackwell received my answer to his proposal 18 months ago. That answer was no. Anything he chose to read into basic social politeness after that was his delusion, not my encouragement." The attorney flinched at her tone. "No further questions?" Nathaniel wanted to applaud. The trial lasted 6 days. The prosecution called 43 witnesses, guests from the wedding police officers who'd arrested Blackwell, the guards who'd fought off his kidnapping attempt, handwriting experts who authenticated his threatening letters. They also called the families of Sarah Morrison and Emily Hartwick. Sarah's mother testified about the last time she'd seen her daughter, happy, engaged, planning a wedding. About the phone call 3 months later from the police saying they'd found a body. Emily's father testified about the rope burns on his daughter's wrists when they'd finally recovered her remains. About the coroner's report that said she'd been alive for weeks after she disappeared. About the nightmares he still had, imagining what those weeks had been like. He also mentioned that Emily had left behind a daughter, Evelyn, who'd been only 5 years old when her mother disappeared. The little girl had spent over 2 years in state custody at the Providence Orphanage before distant relatives could be located. By the time the families were done testifying, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Except Blackwell's. He sat at the defense table with a small smile on his face, lost in whatever fantasy world he'd constructed where he was the victim of a vast conspiracy. The defense called no witnesses. What could they say? Their client had committed his crimes in front of hundreds of people. Though Blackwell's attorneys did file motions for dismissal based on his political connections, attempted to call in favors from the judges and senators who'd once protected him. But the public nature of his crimes had made him radioactive. One by one, his former allies issued statements distancing themselves from him. The senators claimed they barely knew him. The judges recused themselves from any involvement. The police commissioner, who'd looked the other way for years, suddenly announced his retirement. Money and connections couldn't save him now. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. Guilty on all counts. The judge, one of the 3 who'd been at the wedding, showed no mercy during sentencing. "Cornelius Blackwell, you have been found guilty of attempted murder, terroristic threats, and conspiracy in the deaths of Sarah Morrison and Emily Hartwick. You used your wealth and connections to terrorize innocent women. You believed yourself above the law. You were wrong." He paused, looking down at Blackwell with obvious disgust. "This court sentences you to death by hanging. Sentenced to be carried out 30 days from today. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none." The gavel fell. Blackwell finally reacted, screaming, thrashing, having to be physically restrained by bailiffs as they dragged him from the courtroom. "Rosalind, you'll always belong to me." His voice echoed through the courthouse, even after the door slammed shut behind him. Nathaniel turned to his wife. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, face composed. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She turned to him, and in her eyes he saw not triumph or relief, but something quieter. Closure, perhaps. "I'm free," she said simply. But Nathaniel wasn't done with Cornelius Blackwell yet. While the criminal trial had been proceeding, he'd been conducting his own campaign. With Murphy's help and his own extensive business network, he'd systematically dismantled Blackwell's financial empire. It started with the called loans $3 million Blackwell couldn't cover. His steel company's stock plummeted. Investors fled. Contracts were canceled. Then Nathaniel bought the mortgages on Blackwell's properties, the Manhattan Townhouse, the Newport Estate, the Boston Holdings. All of them foreclosed within weeks. He purchased Blackwell's debts from every creditor willing to sell, then called them all at once. The man who'd thought himself untouchable discovered that without money, political connections were worthless. The process took 2 months, careful, methodical, legal. Nathaniel documented every transaction, made sure every action was above reproach. He wanted no questions about the legitimacy of Blackwell's financial ruin. By the time the execution was scheduled, Cornelius Blackwell had gone from one of New York's wealthiest men to a pauper sitting in a jail cell abandoned by everyone he'd thought were friends. "You've destroyed him," Murphy observed, reviewing the final accounting in Nathaniel's study. "Yes. Thoroughly, Brian. Yes. Well, some might say you've gone too far." Nathaniel looked up from the ledgers showing Blackwell's complete financial ruin. "He murdered 2 women and tried to murder my wife. I don't think I've gone far enough." Murphy smiled grimly. "I wasn't criticizing, just observing." He closed his notebook. "What are you going to do with all his assets? You own everything he had now. Sell it. Donate the proceeds to organizations that help victims of stalking and domestic violence. Let something good come from his evil." Mrs. Thornhill's idea. Mine, actually, though she approved enthusiastically. "She's changed you." Nathaniel considered that. "No, she's revealed who I was meant to be. There's a difference." 3 months after the trial, and Nathaniel and Rosalind had finally settled into something resembling normal married life. The media frenzy had died down. The society gossips had moved on to other scandals. The letters of congratulation and curiosity had finally stopped arriving in overwhelming numbers. They'd made Thornhill Estate their primary residence, though Nathaniel still traveled to New York twice a month for business. Rosalind had thrown herself into her charitable work, establishing a foundation to support women escaping dangerous situations. She also gave talks carefully vetted and controlled about her experience, lending her voice to others who couldn't speak. She was remarkable. Every day, Nathaniel discovered something new to love about her, like the way she insisted on reviewing his business contracts, catching details his lawyers had missed. Like the way she played piano every morning at dawn, filling the house with music. Like the way she'd started teaching the household staff's children to read, establishing an informal school in the East Wing. Like the way she looked at him over breakfast with love and humor, and the shared understanding of 2 people who'd been through hell and chosen each other anyway. Their marriage had started with deception and danger. It had become the truest thing in his life. They were sitting together in the library one evening. She was reading. He was working on correspondence when Theodore appeared with a telegram. "For you, sir," marked urgent. Nathaniel opened it, read it, and felt something cold settle in his chest. "What is it?" Rosalind asked, seeing his expression. "The execution has been scheduled, 5 days from now." She set down her book slowly. "Do you want to go? Do you?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I think I need to. I need to see it end, really end, not just know it happened, but witness it myself. Then we'll go together." The execution was scheduled for dawn on a Thursday morning at the Rhode Island State Prison. A small crowd gathered outside the prison gates, mostly reporters and the morbidly curious. Nathaniel and Rosalind were escorted through a side entrance along with the families of Sarah Morrison and Emily Hartwick. They sat in a small viewing room separated from the gallows by a pane of glass. Nathaniel held Rosalind's hand, feeling the fine tremors running through her. "You don't have to watch," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." At precisely 6 o'clock, the door to the execution chamber opened. Guards led Blackwell out. He'd aged decades in the 3 months since sentencing. His hair had gone completely gray. His face was a skull wrapped in parchment, but his eyes were still burning with that same mad obsession. He scanned the viewing room, and when he found Rosalind, His entire face changed. "Rosalind," he said, his voice carrying through the glass. "My love, you came." She didn't respond, didn't move, didn't give him anything. "I forgive you," he continued, even as the guards positioned him on the trapdoor. "I know they forced you to testify against me. I know you didn't mean what you said. We'll be together again soon. In the next life, if not this one, I'll wait for you forever." The hood went over his head. The noose tightened around his neck. The chaplain said a prayer Blackwell didn't hear. The warden asked if he had any final words. "I love you, Rosalind. You'll always." The trap door opened. The fall was short. The neck broke cleanly. Cornelius Blackwell died instantly. Mid-declaration, his final words cut off by the sudden drop into silence. Rosalind watched without flinching. Nathaniel watched her, ready to look away if she needed him to, but she didn't look away. She watched until the doctor pronounced Blackwell dead. She watched until the guards cut down the body. She watched until they carried him out of the chamber. Only then did she turn to Nathaniel. "It's over," she said. "Yes." "He's really gone." "Yes." She took a shaky breath, then another. Then she stood straight-backed and dignified and walked out of the viewing room with her head high. They didn't speak on the carriage ride back to Newport, but she held his hand the entire way, and he felt her grip gradually relax as the miles passed. It wasn't until they were back at Thornhill Estate, safe in their private sitting room, that she finally broke down. She cried for the first time since everything had started. Great wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. She cried for the fear she'd carried for 18 months, for the women who hadn't survived, for the girl she'd been before Blackwell's obsession had stolen her peace. Nathaniel held her through all of it, his own tears silent on his cheeks. And when she finally exhausted herself into stillness, she pulled back and looked at him with clear eyes. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For loving me, for protecting me, for standing with me through all of this." She cupped his face in her hands. "For being exactly the partner I needed. Thank you for choosing me, for trusting me, for being brave enough to fight back." They kissed, then soft and sweet and full of promise. Not the passionate kiss of their wedding or the desperate kisses of their early days. This was the kiss of two people who'd been through fire and emerged stronger, closer, unbreakable. "I want to make love to my husband," Rosalind said when they broke apart. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I'm ready. I'm free." She smiled, and it was radiant. "I want to start our real life now. No more fear. No more looking over our shoulders. Just us building something beautiful together." He carried her to their bedroom, and for the first time since their wedding, they came together as husband and wife in every sense. It was tender and sweet and occasionally awkward and absolutely perfect. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets with dawn light beginning to paint the sky, Rosalind traced patterns on his chest. "I'm happy," she said, wonder in her voice. "Actually, truly happy. I wasn't sure I'd ever feel this way again." "Get used to it. I plan to make you this happy for the next 60 years. She laughed. 60 years, you're very confident." "I'm very determined. There's a difference." She kissed him again, lazy and contented. "I love you, Nathaniel Thornhill." "I love you too, Rosalind Thornhill." 1 year later, the nursery at Thornhill Estate was painted in soft shades of cream and gold with curtains that filtered the afternoon sun into gentle warmth. Rosalind stood at the window, the same window where Nathaniel had watched her arrive that first day, cradling their 3-month-old son against her shoulder. James Nathaniel Thornhill had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and he was currently sleeping the deep, boneless sleep of well-fed infants. Outside, Nathaniel was playing in the garden with Evelyn. The 8-year-old girl ran across the lawn laughing as Nathaniel chased her with exaggerated slowness. Her dark hair flew behind her like a banner, and her joy was so pure it made Rosalind's heart ache. Evelyn Hartwick had come to them 6 months ago. The trial had brought her situation to light. Orphaned by her mother's murder, she'd spent over 2 years in the Providence State Orphanage while authorities searched for relatives. When Emily's distant cousins were finally located, they declined to take responsibility for the child. The state had contacted the Thornhills asking if they might consider adoption given their connection to the case. Nathaniel and Rosalind hadn't hesitated. Emily Hartwick's daughter deserved better than an institution. She deserved a home, a family, parents who would love and protect her. She deserved the life her mother should have lived to give her. Nathaniel caught Evelyn and swung her in a circle, and her laughter carried through the open window. He was so gentle with her, so patient. He'd been worried he wouldn't know how to be a father, but he was magnificent at it. Rosalind watched her husband and daughter play in the garden, felt her son's warm weight against her chest, and felt so full of love she thought her heart might burst. A year ago, she'd stood at a different window in this house, blood on her lip, from Blackwell's violence, terrified of her future. Now she stood at this window, healed and whole and happier than she'd ever imagined possible. The door opened behind her. Mrs. Thornhill, her mother-in-law and unexpected ally, entered with a tea tray. "How's my grandson?" "Perfect and asleep, which means also perfect." Helena smiled and set down the tray. "You look radiant, dear." "I feel radiant." Rosalind glanced out the window again. "Look at them." Helena joined her at the window, and they watched together as Nathaniel showed Evelyn how to do a cartwheel, both of them collapsing in the grass in a tangle of limbs and laughter. "He's happy," Helena said softly. "I've never seen him like this, not even before his father died." "He makes me happy too." "I know. I can see it every time you look at each other." Helena paused. "I'm sorry for my part in the deception that brought you together. I thought I was helping, but I nearly—" "You did help," Rosalind interrupted gently. "If you and my mother had been honest, we might never have agreed to meet. We would have found reasons to refuse to protect ourselves. But the deception forced us past our defenses, and we found something real. You're very generous. I'm very happy, and I have you to thank for that, at least in part." Helena's eyes glistened with tears. "You're the daughter I always wanted, the partner Nathaniel deserved. I'm so grateful you're part of this family." They embraced, carefully mindful of the sleeping baby between them. When they pulled apart, Rosalind looked out the window one more time. Nathaniel had spotted her and was waving. Evelyn waved too, bouncing with excitement. "I should go down," Rosalind said, before Evelyn exhausts him completely. "Take James. I'll bring the tea to the garden." Rosalind carried her son down the stairs and out into the golden afternoon. Nathaniel met her halfway across the lawn, Evelyn clinging to his back like a monkey. "Look, Mama," Evelyn called. "Papa taught me to do a cartwheel." "I saw. You were brilliant." Evelyn beamed and slid down from Nathaniel's arm. "Can I hold James?" "If you sit down very carefully." They settled on a blanket under the old oak tree, the same tree that shaded Nathaniel's secret observatory. Evelyn cradled James with the intense concentration of an 8-year-old, given a precious responsibility. Nathaniel sat beside Rosalind, his arm around her shoulders. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "Impossibly happy. Even with the Kawaism." She looked around at their little family, the adopted daughter, the infant son, the husband who'd walked through fire for her, especially with the chaos. He kissed her temple. "Good, because I have news." "What kind of news?" "The foundation you started, the one supporting victims of stalking and domestic violence." "What about it?" "It's been so successful that 3 other states want to replicate the model. They're asking you to consult to help them establish similar programs." Rosalind's eyes widened. "Really? Really? You've helped dozens of women escape dangerous situations. You've given them resources, legal support, safe housing. You've turned your experience into something that saves lives." He took her hand. "I'm so proud of you. We did it together. You did the hard part. I just wrote the checks." "That's not true, and you know it." Evelyn looked up from cooing at James. "Are you two arguing about who's better again?" Nathaniel and Rosalind both laughed. "We're not arguing," Rosalind said. "We're appreciating each other." "That's gross." "Wait until you're older. You'll understand." Evelyn made a face that suggested she very much doubted that. Helena arrived with the tea tray, and for a while they all sat together in the dappled shade, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of amber and gold. James woke and needed feeding. Evelyn demanded a story. Nathaniel read to them from a book of fairy tales while Rosalind nursed their son. It was perfectly ordinary. It was perfectly extraordinary. It was everything Rosalind had feared she'd never have. Later that evening, after Evelyn had been put to bed and James was sleeping in his cradle, Nathaniel and Rosalind stood together in the same spot where they'd first kissed as husband and wife. The library was quiet, lit only by firelight and the stars visible through the tall windows. They'd made love on the sofa earlier, slow and sweet and comfortable in the way of couples who'd learned each other's rhythms. Now they just held each other, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. Do you ever think about him, Rosalind asked quietly. She didn't have to clarify who him was. Sometimes, Nathaniel admitted. Usually when I think about how different our lives would be if he'd succeeded, if he'd taken you from me. But he didn't. No, he didn't. He pulled back enough to look at her face. Do you? Less and less. At first, I thought about him constantly replaying everything, wondering what I could have done differently. But now, she shrugged, now I'm too busy living to waste time thinking about him. He's dead. We're alive. We won. We won this, he repeated, liking the sound of it. And we built something beautiful. A family, a life, love. She smiled up at him. He wanted to own me, but he gave me you instead. Poetic justice, and the best kind. They stood together in the firelight, two people who'd been brought together by deception and danger, who'd chosen each other despite everything, who'd built a partnership stronger than steel. I have something for you, Nathaniel said suddenly. He crossed to his desk and pulled out a leather-bound journal. What is it? My father kept a journal about my mother, their courtship, their marriage, the lessons he learned about love and partnership. He gave it to me before he died, told me to read it when I found the woman I wanted to marry. He held it out to her. I've been adding to it, writing about us, about what I've learned from you. Someday I'll give it to James or Evelyn if she marries, so they'll know what real love looks like. Rosalind took the journal with trembling hands, paging through entries in two different handwritings, the father's advice and the son's experiences. One entry caught her eye, dated 3 days after their wedding. I thought I was marrying for convenience. I thought love was something that grew slowly over years. I was wrong. Real love is choosing someone even when it's terrifying. Real love is standing between them and a gun. Real love is being willing to destroy anyone who threatens them. But more than that, real love is the quiet moments, the conversations that last until dawn, the way she looks at me when she thinks I'm not watching, the way she makes me want to be better than I am. I am the luckiest man alive. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. You wrote this, every word. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. This is just me trying to capture even a fraction of what you mean to me. She set down the journal carefully and pulled him into a kiss that was fierce and tender and full of all the words she couldn't quite speak. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Take me to bed, she said. I want to make more memories worth writing about. He swept her into his arms, and she laughed, bright and joyous and free. They'd started with a lie. They'd built a truth, and that truth would last forever. 2 years later, a young woman arrived at the offices of the Thornhill Foundation in New York. She was thin and haunted with bruises she tried to hide beneath long sleeves. I need help, she told the receptionist. My husband won't let me leave. He says I belong to him. The receptionist, trained by Rosalind herself, didn't hesitate. You're safe now, she said. Let me get you somewhere secure, and then we'll make a plan. Within an hour, the woman was in a safe house. Within a day, she had a lawyer. Within a week, she had divorce papers filed and a restraining order in place. Within a month, she had her life back. She was the 47th woman the foundation had helped that year. She would not be the last. And every time Rosalind heard about another success story, another woman freed from fear, she thought about the girl she'd been standing at a window with blood on her lip, terrified of her future. She thought about the choice she'd made to fight back instead of surrender. She thought about the love she'd found in the most unexpected place, and she smiled. Rosalind Thornhill had been many things: a frightened girl, a brave bride, a fierce advocate. But most of all, she was free, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure other women could say the same.